O God, though my words will be spoken today, may only your word be heard. Amen. Please make yourselves comfortable. This morning we hear from the prophet Micah, who speaks into a moment that feels familiar. Micah is writing in the 8th century before Christ when the world felt as though it might be coming apart at the seams. The Assyrian Empire was rising. Fear is in the air, and yet Micah insists that the deepest threat facing people is not from a foreign army or adversary, not from outside enemies. The real danger is what is happening within, what is happening among God's people. Land is being seized from the poor, legal manipulation. Wealth is concentrating in the hands of a few. Judges can be bought. Leaders are some religious leaders are compromised, offering comforting words instead of truth, instead of performing acts of solidarity and justice. Their worship life continues and sacrifices are offered. The language of faith is everywhere. But the covenant that God made with God's people is being hollowed out. The nation, Israel, is not keeping its end of the deal. And that is why Micah writes about God bringing a lawsuit against the nation. In this lawsuit that is described in our reading this morning, God is both the plaintiff and the judge. God calls the mountains as witnesses against Israel and Judah for their idolatry, their corruption, and their social injustice. And Micah, in this story, acts as a prosecuting attorney, detailing the charges of injustice against the poor. And God, the plaintiff, asks a heartbreaking question. "Oh, my people, what have I done to you? In what have I wearied you?" God reminds them, "I delivered you from slavery. I guided you through the wilderness. I gave you leaders. I have been faithful." And what, in response to God's faithfulness, does God ask of God's people? Micah answers that very clearly. Micah says, "What does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God?" Not loyalty to power, not silence in the face of injustice, not massing wealth or resources as a sign of chosenness, but justice, mercy, and humility. When Jesus sits on the hillside in Matthew's gospel, which we heard this morning, he begins to teach, and he's standing squarely in Micah's tradition. The Beatitudes are not just sentimental blessings. They're a radical reorientation of the world, of signs of God's blessing. It tells us where that blessing can be found. It's not to say that God's blessing is not found elsewhere. It's not an exclusive list. But it's a reminder that God's blessing is found in places the world ignores and in what people might label unlikely places and in unlikely people or life situations. The poor in spirit, the people who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, the merciful, and the peacemakers. Jesus does not echo the sentiments of the world around him, the empire, and say, "Blessed are the powerful," or "Blessed are the triumphant," or "Blessed are those who conquer and dominate." Jesus locates God's blessing among those who know their need, those who grieve what is broken, those who refuse cruelty, and those who long deeply for a world set right. And so where do we find God's blessing? We don't find it where fear is amplified for gain. We don't find blessing where truth is bent for convenience. We don't find blessing where religion is used to excuse harm. We continue to find God's blessing where people refuse to give up on righteousness, even when it costs them their lives. God's blessing rests on those who tell the truth instead of manipulating it for a particular end, even when it costs them their careers or callings. God's blessing abides with those who choose mercy, even when vengeance would be easier and maybe feel more natural. God's blessing abides with those who choose humility when domination would be rewarded. And it abides with those who choose peacemaking when silence would feel safer. This week, Bishop Marianne Buddy authored a letter that was signed by 153 of her colleague bishops of the Episcopal Church, including our own Bishop Austin Rios. The letter responded to the events in Minneapolis and across the country and made a moral statement about the dignity of human people, proclaiming the dignity of every human person and calling on elected leaders and others to act in ways that protects that dignity, in ways that recognize that dignity. The bishop's letter did not claim power. It did not endorse a political or a partisan position. It did not offer any easy answers, but it also did not avoid the truth. It named what Micah named and what Jesus blessed: the responsibility of God's people to resist being formed by fear and to hold on to hope and to respect and protect the dignity of every human person. The bishop's letter is an act of moral clarity, and it shows what it means to walk humbly with our God in public. It named the hard and hopeful invitation of our moment. We confront daily the question of whether fear or anxiety will drive us towards silence or acquiescence, or whether our deepest hope, rooted in God's faithfulness to us, will cause us to choose justice, to do what is right, to respect the dignity of all people in what we believe and in what we say, and in how we walk humbly with our God in public. Micah and our bishops remind us that faithfulness is embodied. Faithfulness is embodied in our acts of justice, in our acts of loving kindness toward one another, and in our daily walk with God. Faithfulness is embodied in how we treat our neighbors, how we protect those with the least power, and how we tell the truth, even when the truth is hard or inconvenient or unwelcome. When we embody faithfulness in the ways that Micah and our bishops invite, we find God's blessing in the ways that Jesus describes. We find God's blessings as we mourn injustice and refuse to become numb, as we hold on to hope. We find blessing when we hunger for righteousness more than comfort. And we find it when we choose mercy over malice, truth over convenience, and courage over quaint acquiescence. May we hear anew what the Lord requires. May we see anew where God's blessing truly rests. And may we continue our humble, brave walk with God, whose faithfulness endures forever.